cast your heart to a distant realm, a realm of dominion and strength in which two great empires, vast and hungry, dominate the land. A realm which is safeguarded from a war which would ravage the land and break the skies by two factors. The first is its mountains, whose rocky peaks, tall and terrible, reach high into the sky, making them impenetrable by all but the most skilled of climbers. The second is the Iss'kel, for there is but a single safe pass leading through those mountains, and it is guarded by the Iss'kel. For generations these two empires, having conquered all within easy reach, sent armies over the safe pass, but each time they vanished, with no survivors to tell the tale. Their spies, placed through great effort, all reported that no armies had arrived, and neither side could find any trace of the souls who had been lost there. Finally, after decades of fruitless attempts, a king arose, more canny and cruel than his predecessors. At his right hand was Elise, the Crimson Blade, whose ruthlessness and cunning had allowed him to kill or control any who might stand against them. Together, the two had forged the empire into a brutal but efficient kingdom, where all dissidents were stomped out with savage force. In those days, the name Elise was whispered in dark taverns and fearful prayers, for her coming could mean only death to man, woman, and child. The king, who more than anything desired to increase his kingdom and power, sent a platoon of soldiers over the mountain, but, trailing behind them, were groups of specially trained scouts sent to watch and report. To lead these soldiers, he sent Elise, for her loyalty to him was without question, and she had proven her skill by crushing any who opposed them. She swore that she would find whatever force had killed their men, and having crushed them, would return victorious once more. Their journey to the pass went without issue, but upon reaching the base of the pass and seeing its snowy moor, the soldiers began to grow restless, questioning the necessity of the task that had been given them. "Is the empire not large enough?" and "The king has sent us to die," were common refrains in the bitterly cold camp, but Elise would not hear their complaints. She pushed them forward into the pass, leading the way with powerful strides through the waist-high snow. Elise had just begun to believe that they would safely cross over the pass when the soldiers behind her screamed in pain and terror. She spun to find her men overwhelmed by score upon score of specters rising up from the snow all around them. Figures in the form of men, but covered in rags and ice and carrying axes as black as night. She rushed to strike down these new enemies of the crown, but specters burst from the snow around her, forcing her back. They attacked her as one, but Elise's blade glowed red with the blood of the innocent. She rebuffed the attack, fighting in a frenzy against a dozen opponents. But even with all her skill and ferocity, she could do little more than fight them to a standstill. For hours they fought, the entirety of Elise's being focused on the fight, while her men, overwhelmed by the specters and unable to match Elise's skill, fell one by one until only she remained. It is said that Elise, her crimson blade stark against white snow and ebon axe, fought for 2 days before they finally overwhelmed her, for even she could not fight forever. But in that moment, defenseless, exhausted, and completely at their mercy, they did not strike her down. When she awoke, she found that she had been taken captive, not by specters, as she had thought, but by men dressed in rags and covered in ice. The warriors had taken her back to a large village, well hidden in the valleys and crags of the mountain. In that village, she found a group of villagers who lived free from the greedy influence of the two empires. She scoffed at them, ridiculing their simple, austere life, and telling them her king, who now knew of them, would come for them with power and might as they could scarcely comprehend. But months passed, and no armies came, and no powerful magics to blast apart the mountain were cast. For in her absence, the people of the kingdom had seen their chance, and had rebelled with a force and power of will that the king had not expected. Perhaps you are wondering why they did not kill her, as they had the rest of her number, or the many other armies that had come before her. Perhaps they respected her strength. She had, after all, fought their warriors to a standstill for days. Perhaps they saw in her hope, believing that if they could convince this warrior of the futility of her ways, that she might bring change to her bloodthirsty nation. For though the warriors of the Iss'kel had long held back the imperial armies, they knew that they could not hold them back forever. Or perhaps they had simply killed enough, and seeing the rare opportunity to show mercy, took it. Perhaps all three. The answer is lost to time and legend. What is known is that Elise, one-time leader of the purging armies of the empire, was now a prisoner of the Iss'kel. At first she was kept locked away, but as months, then years passed, she was allowed to roam the village, and as she integrated into the villagers' lives, the austere way of life that she had ridiculed grew more and more appealing to her. Though their lives were simple and sometimes hard, they were also peaceful. She found something that she had never had in her difficult life: a home. After the first year, she stopped trying to escape. After the second, she had become accepted as one of them. And after the third, they began to teach her their secrets. She learned their arts of meditation, through which she learned to control the hate and fury of her mind, and in calming her mind, to calm her body as well. She learned to see and be guided by the flow of power through her body, changing her blunt ferocity and power into the lethal grace and precision of a dancer. Finally, she learned to slow the movement of power through her body and enter a deep meditation in which her body teetered on the precipice of life and death. It was this skill, she learned, that allowed the warriors of the Iss'kel to survive, buried in the deep snow, for decades or even centuries, as their bodies did not age nor feel the effects of the cold. For 7 years, she lived amongst them, knowing peace for the first time in her life. Her crimson blade, which had for so long been her name and identity, set aside to collect dust. But rare is a warrior who can walk away from war. One day, the people of the Iss'kel rose from their beds to find a heat beating down on them as had never been felt in the history of their village. That day, the snows that had for so long hidden their village and sheltered their warriors began to melt. Within a week, the snow-covered pass had transformed into a barren desert. The trees withered under the beating sun, and the warriors, who had for decades hidden themselves in the snows, were exposed. In a span of days, the advantage that had protected the Iss'kel for generations was gone, and with its disappearance came the army. It was vast and powerful, greater than any raised before it, for the king had, after many years, quelled the rebellions, and with raised fist, turned rebels into soldiers to serve his dark purposes. The villagers and warriors, seeing the army that was marching towards them, feared for their lives. They made frantic preparations to flee from their home and into the deep mountains. The elders and children wept in fear and loss, while the rest of the villagers constructed a large barricade to block the entrance to their home. As the army grew closer, the people grew desperate in their preparations, all save for Elise. When she had learned of the army, she had walked to the center of the village and fallen into a trance so deep that the people feared to wake her. As the army approached and the Iss'kel made their preparations, Elise meditated. Finally, as the army came within striking distance, the villagers felt they could wait no longer. They woke her, telling her to flee with them, but Elise refused. Without a word, she rose, and taking her blade from where it had been set aside, strode out of the village, clearing the barricade in a single leap. The warriors, confused and frightened but unwilling to let one of their own go to their death, followed behind her, pleading with her to turn back, but she would not. For the first time in 7 years since she had been taken captive, Elise left the village. She marched out onto the pass, her mind replaying the events that had led her to this place, the people she had lost on this pass in vain pursuit of power, and the people she had gained in pursuit of peace and clarity. When she reached the center of the pass, she stopped, placing her arms behind her back. "Go," she said to the warriors. "These are my people. This is my fight. Protect the villagers. If I can win, I will win. If not, I will buy you the time you need. I swear it." But the warriors, many of whom had been frozen in the snow for decades and did not know Elise, nonetheless refused. "They are not your people. We are. You fight for peace, and so will we." Together they waited, a band of warriors barely 10 score, as an army that covered the ground like locusts grew ever closer. Upon seeing Elise, for her visage was well known, the army stopped, a murmur spreading through the ranks. The king, for his knowledge of Iss'kel had made him bold enough to come himself, stepped out from the army and spoke. "Elise," he said, his voice contemptuous and scornful, "we believed you dead, and now we find you standing with our enemies. Come, take your place at the head of our armies, and together we will crush these interlopers and finally conquer the lands." Elise looked at the king whom she had once served with all her heart. He had once been everything Elise had aspired to be, powerful, cold-hearted, and ruthless. But as she looked upon him now, he seemed to be a sad and contemptible man, worthy not even of her pity. Drawing her crimson blade, she spoke a single word, loud and clear as the day: "No." Upon her word, the innocent blood which had stained her sword began to writhe and shift, It exploded out, surrounding Elise and the king. Overwhelming feelings of grief, guilt, and anger, the likes of which would drive even the strongest person to madness, assaulted them. The king screamed, the blood which he had so callously ordered to be spilled, bitterly afflicting him for his misdeeds. He fell to his knees, hands covering his ears, moans of terror and agony escaping his lips. Elise too felt the judgment of the blood. The screams of terror as innocent lives died by her hand, the desire of the rebels to protect their friends and build a better life, the pain of blade-cutting flesh and panic of suffocating on one's own blood. But she did not fight the judgment. She accepted it. "Use me," she said in her heart. "Let my arm be the bringer of justice, and my heart the bearer of mercy, and I will bring peace to my people." The blood bit down to the very bone and sinew of her soul, but it did not find the person who brought pain and death, but a kindred spirit. A soul stained with the blood of the innocent, but one with a burning desire to bring the peace and love that she had found to a homeland that she had helped to rid of it. The blood, which more than anything desired justice, responded. When Elise opened her eyes, she found that the king, though unsteady, was rising to his feet, having overcome the judgment of blood. For the callous heart of an evil man is not easily overwhelmed by guilt. He looked at her with hatred in his eyes. "Kill them!" he screamed, and like a cloud of locust, the army charged, with hatred in their eyes and hearts desiring blood. "Protect them," Elise whispered, and the blood which had been undulating from her sword flowed out to the warriors behind her, forming blood-red armor. Elise raised her sword, now as white as snow, and charged. The battle, which has since become known as the Battle of Innocent Blood, is said to have raged for days. Each of the Iss'kel, protected by the armor of innocent blood, fought like 50 men, and Elise fought with the focus of the Iss'kel and the wrath of the dead. Their forces flowed through the army, like snow melt, cutting a path through ground. Wherever there was weakness, they pushed, and wherever there was strength, they turned aside. Try as they might, the army could not box them in, could not catch them, for they fought with skill and cunning. And any time they faltered, Elise was there, dancing through the enemies with a skill never before seen in all the realm, her snow-white blade protecting the warriors in her care. To this day, it is unknown how the king fell. Perhaps, as many believe, Elise found him and slayed him. Perhaps his men, seeing the hopelessness of battle, killed him. Or perhaps the arrogant fool, unaccustomed to doing battle with his own hands, fell off his horse, his crown toppling as his head broke open against the rocks. As I said, no one knows. But what is known is that word of the king's death spread amongst the army like a plague of doubt. All who heard it broke against the onslaught of the Iss'kel, rushing down the pass with no care for their comrades. It is said that nearly 1/4 of those who died on that pass did so, not at the hands of their foes, but in the avalanche of fleeing soldiers. As for the rest of the story, we do not have time to tell of how Elise, now crowned as queen, brought sweeping change onto her homeland, or of those who attempted to take her life to prevent this, nor to speak of her courtship with Prince Mercain, and how their love united two empires, ending the war that Elise had long sought to avoid and bringing peace to the realm, nor how their children became legends in their own rights, walking the manifold realms and teaching of peace and justice. No, we do not have time for such things today. For today, what you must know is this. Several days after the fight, Elise, wearing the king's crown and flanked by warriors in blood-red armor, strode into the camp the fleeing army had made at the bottom of the pass. None stopped her as she entered into the command tent, slammed her sword through the battle plans, and declared herself regent. She became known as Elise, the Crimson Queen, and to this day she is heralded as the greatest ruler the realm has ever known.